I should have known something was off when Jack started working late more often and his phone was constantly pinging with texts and emails. But I was so caught up in my own graphic design work that I didn't pay much attention. We'd been married for 5 years, and even though he was 10 years younger, I never imagined he would betray me. That all changed one morning when I was cleaning out Jack's home office. Tucked behind some books on the shelf, I found a letter addressed to him from his mother, Eleanor. My heart pounded as I unfolded the pages. It was a detailed plan, laying out how she and Jack could take control of my personal finances and business assets for their family's future legacy. I felt sick to my stomach. "Emily, are you okay? You look pale." Jack's voice made me jump. He must have just gotten home from another late night at the office. I whirled around, the letter shaking in my hands. "Jack, why is there a letter discussing my assets behind my back?" His eyes went wide. "What? Let me see that." He snatched the letter from my grasp and started reading it, his expression darkening. "This is ridiculous. My mother is getting too involved in our business as usual," he muttered, crumpling the letter. "I'm so sorry, Em. You know how she can be." I wanted to believe his excuse, but something felt very wrong. Why was his mother so obsessed with my money and assets? Over the next few weeks, I noticed Jack pulling away from me, spending more time working late, and making snide comments about how I was getting older. His mother, Eleanor, started popping over unannounced, scrutinizing every detail of our home life. One afternoon, Eleanor let herself in with her spare key while I was working from home. I could hear her rummaging around in the kitchen before she poked her head into my office. "There you are, Emily, dear. Working hard as always." "I see," she said in that sickly sweet tone. Her eyes raked over me with tut-tuts. "You know, you simply must start dressing more professionally if you want to keep attracting clients at your age." I bristled at her backhanded insult. "I'll keep that in mind, Eleanor. Can I get you anything? I'm just swamped with work right now." No, don't let me interrupt your little projects." She waved her hand dismissively. "I only stopped by to make sure you and Jack are still on track for having children soon. You're not getting any younger, you know." The dig about my age and her not-so-subtle push for grandchildren was a low blow. Jack and I had decided to wait a few more years before starting a family. But of course his domineering mother had other plans. "We'll have children when we're ready, Eleanor," I said through gritted teeth. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work now." She gave me one last disapproving sniff before breezing out. My hands were shaking with anger and hurt by the time she left. Eleanor had been trying to undermine me from the moment Jack and I started dating, but her behavior was getting more outrageous and unbearable with each passing week. I knew in my gut that she and Jack were up to something. I just had no idea how incredibly twisted and cruel their plan was, or how much strength I would need to protect myself from the people closest to me. Looking back, the signs were there from the beginning that Jack's charming facade hid a darker truth. When we first met at a work event, he swept me off my feet with his youthful energy and relentless flattery. At 35, he was 10 years my junior, but I was drawn to his confidence and drive to succeed in the marketing world. We had a whirlwind romance, getting engaged after only 6 months of dating. His mother, Eleanor, insisted we have a lavish wedding at her country club to properly celebrate the joining of our families. I should have realized then that she saw me more as an asset than a daughter-in-law. In those early years, Jack seemed like the perfect partner, attentive, passionate, and supportive of my graphic design career. We'd come home from work, cook dinner together, and spend evenings cuddled up watching movies. He constantly showered me with affection and made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. But then things started changing. Little by little, Jack became more distant and consumed with work. At first, I brushed it off as normal career stress, but his late nights bled into weekends, and he was constantly tapping away on his phone or laptop. I missed the warmth and intimacy we once shared. "Working late again?" I asked one Friday evening as he rushed out the door, straightening his tie. "Don't wait up for me, babe. This new client is a nightmare." He gave me a peck on the cheek and hurried off. Settling onto the couch alone, I tried not to feel hurt and abandoned. This was just a busy season, I told myself. He'll go back to normal soon. The next morning, I reached for Jack's phone to set a reminder for our upcoming weekend plans, and that's when I saw it. A series of flirty text messages from some woman named Victoria. "Who's this?" One message read with a winky face emoji. "Your new work wife you've been spending so much time with?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I scrolled through more messages filled with suggestive banter and references to getting together soon. Tears stung my eyes as the truth hit me. My husband was having an emotional affair right under my nose. That's when I heard Eleanor's shrill voice in the hallway, followed by her pounding at the front door. "Emily, are you decent? I'm coming in." She barged inside without waiting for an answer, as usual. I quickly minimized Jack's messages, not ready to reveal what I'd discovered. "Good morning, Eleanor. What a surprise." "Well, it shouldn't be. You know I like to pop in unannounced to make sure my son's home is running smoothly," she said, already inspecting the mail and straightening picture frames. I forced a tight smile, my mind spinning over the texts. "How thoughtful of you." "Speaking of Jack, where is my hard-working boy this morning?" Eleanor craned her neck, peering around the house. "Oh, just another late work night for him," I replied, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. Eleanor clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Really, Emily, you simply must get a handle on his schedule. Letting a man put in those kinds of hours is no way to maintain a proper family." My cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment, as if I had any control over Jack's constant absence from our home, from our marriage. But arguing with Eleanor was useless. She always had to assert her dominance and make me feel inadequate. "I'll make sure to mention that to him." I mumbled, desperate for her to leave so I could process what I'd seen on Jack's phone. Eleanor patted my arm condescendingly. "See that you do, dear. Now I'm off to the club for tennis. Don't work too hard on those little projects of yours." I watched her sweeping out with a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. If Eleanor's smug attitude was any indication, she was well aware of the strain on my marriage, and maybe even the cause of it. The text messages were just the tip of the iceberg. My life was unraveling more quickly than I could handle, but I had to stay strong and figure out what game Jack and his mother were really playing. My future happiness depended on uncovering the truth. After discovering Jack's flirtatious texts with the neighbor Victoria, my life became a waking nightmare. Jack was constantly working late, no doubt carrying on his emotional affair right under my nose, and his mother Eleanor was more overbearing than ever, inserting herself into our crumbling marriage at every turn. "Have you given any more thought to starting a family?" Eleanor asked during one of her unannounced visits, straightening the throw pillows on the couch. "You're not getting any younger, you know." I grit my teeth, feeling that familiar surge of anger and inadequacy. "Jack and I will have children when we're ready, Eleanor. Not on your timeline." She tsked loudly. "Well, you'd better get a move on. That biological clock is ticking." She eyed me up and down with disdain. "Although I must say you're certainly putting on some extra padding lately. Hardly a good look for motherhood." The dig at my appearance was a low blow even for her. I'd gained a little weight recently due to the stress of my crumbling marriage, but her remark felt designed to crush my self-esteem. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied icily, fighting back tears of humiliation. Couldn't she see how her constant criticism was destroying me? But of course, Eleanor's cruel behavior was entirely intentional. The more I pulled away from Jack emotionally, the more she amped up her manipulative tactics to drive a wedge between us. Her meddling knew no bounds. One evening, Jack came home late from another work dinner, reeking of Victoria's cheap perfume. As he brushed past me in the hallway, I finally snapped. "That's it, I can't do this anymore," I said, squaring my shoulders to face him. "I know you've been having an affair with that woman down the street, the lies, the late nights. It's too much, Jack." He had the audacity to look shocked. "What, Emily? You're overreacting as usual. Victoria is just a friend from the office. We've been working really long hours together. That's all." "Oh, save it." I shoved his phone in his face, pulled up the incriminating texts. "I saw these messages between you two. The pet names, the suggestive comments. You're cheating on me emotionally, if not physically." Jack's expression darkened, and he slapped the phone out of my hand, leaving a crack in the screen. You're crazy, Emily. Completely paranoid. Is this what happens when you don't have a real job to keep you occupied? My jaw dropped at his casual cruelty. Jack had never spoken to me with such disrespect before. It was like he was a completely different person, arrogant, callous, utterly devoid of the warmth I'd fallen in love with. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. "After everything I've done to support your career, to build this life together." "Well, maybe that's the problem." Jack exploded, his face flushed red. "You're just not fit to handle our family's future, Emily. Not like my mother. Maybe we should rethink this whole relationship." The blow of his harsh words left me reeling, struggling for breath. He was kicking me while I was already down, all because I dared to challenge his infidelity. In that moment, I knew our marriage was broken beyond repair. Jack must have realized he'd gone too far, because his expression softened slightly. "Emily, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Save it," I cut him off, brushing away angry tears. "I can't keep doing this. The lies, the disrespect, your mother's constant interference. It's too much." Turning on my heel, I headed for the guest bedroom, the one I'd been increasingly retreating to over the past few months. I could hear Jack calling after me, but I tuned out his hollow apologies. He'd made his choice, siding with his mother's twisted agenda over me, his wife. As I closed the door behind me, shutting out Jack's muffled pleading, I realized with startling clarity what had to be done. I couldn't leave him, not yet. Not until I figured out exactly what he and Eleanor were up to with my money and assets. I had to stay and fight, protect what was rightfully mine from their greedy schemes. The next day, I started gathering evidence of their betrayal. I knew Jack was hiding something big, and I intended to uncover every last secret, no matter how explosive the fallout. They wanted to underestimate me and take me for a fool. They were going to be in for a rude awakening. I was done being the victim. From now on, I'd be calling the shots to secure my future, even if it meant taking down my own husband and mother-in-law in the process. After the blow-up fight with Jack, I knew our marriage was hanging by a thread. He was completely under his mother's toxic influence, convinced that I was the problem holding their twisted vision of the family legacy back. With each passing day, Jack became more distant and disrespectful, taking Eleanor's side over mine. I felt isolated and alone, like the world was crashing down around me. My own husband and mother-in-law were conspiring against me, but I had no idea what their true agenda was beyond controlling my assets. I needed to figure out their game plan, and fast. Luckily, Jack's arrogance made him sloppy. He started leaving his laptop open around the house, his work emails and files easily accessible. That's when I started gathering evidence. One night, after he'd fallen into a drunken slumber on the couch, reeking of whiskey and Victoria's perfume, I seized my chance. I tiptoed over and opened his laptop, my heart pounding. The first thing I saw were a series of emails between Jack and Eleanor, explicitly detailing their plan to alienate me from his life. There were lists of tactics, undermining my self-esteem, pushing me out of family decisions, even cruel remarks about my age and appearance. My stomach turned as I read Eleanor's words instructing Jack on how to handle his wife. "She's getting too comfortable and complacent," she wrote. "We need to make Emily feel like an outsider so she'll be more eager to please us, especially once we take control of her money." I felt bile rise in my throat. So this was about my assets and financial independence after all. I quickly forwarded the emails to my private account before digging deeper. Attached to one of the emails was a detailed file, Eleanor's master plan for driving a wedge between Jack and me. It had an insultingly accurate profile of my personality, listing my insecurities and vulnerabilities as weaknesses to be exploited. Tactics like love bombing and gaslighting were recommended to regain Jack's control over the relationship. I read with horror how Eleanor had been manipulating us all along, turning Jack against me with mind games and feeding his ego. She wanted me to feel so beaten down and worthless that I'd just hand over everything I'd worked so hard to build. Furious tears burned my eyes, but I refused to break down. Not now, when I finally had proof of their cruelty. I quickly forwarded the file to myself, my hands shaking. That's when I heard Jack stir on the couch, mumbling in his drunken sleep. I shrank back, terrified he'd catch me. but he merely rolled over, the ice cubes melting in his empty glass. As quietly as I could, I gathered up my purse and jacket and crept out of the house. I had to get away, had to process everything I'd discovered about the people I once trusted most in this world. I ended up on my sister Judith's doorstep in the middle of the night, gasping out the sordid tale between sobs. She held me and listened, her expression one of rage and disbelief. "That's it. You're staying with me," she declared firmly. "We'll go back tomorrow and get your things while that bastard is at work. You're done letting them manipulate you, Emily." I nodded, suddenly feeling a surge of resolve. Judith was right. The days of me being the victim were over. If Jack and Eleanor wanted a war over my life and assets, they were going to get one. From that night on, I started secretly planning my escape and securing my finances, all while putting on a calm front for Jack's benefit. I opened a new bank account in my name, diverting funds from our joint accounts he didn't know about. I made copies of all our financial records and important documents. I even line up interviews for new job opportunities, knowing I might have to start over completely. And most importantly, I confided everything to my closest friends like Martha, enlisting their support and advice on how to handle the situation. I was done being isolated. I was building a network of allies to protect myself. With each day, I felt a little stronger, more in control of my destiny. Jack and Eleanor wanted to rip away my identity and drain me of my power? Well, they were about to learn that the meek, unassuming wife they tried to destroy was gone for good. I was a woman reborn, ready to burn their twisted scheme to the ground, and there would be hell to pay. With my newfound determination, I started putting a plan into motion to expose Jack and Eleanor's betrayal. I knew Eleanor would be coming to visit soon for her usual weekend of judgment and meddling. This time, I was ready. A few days before her arrival, I set up a hidden camera in the living room. If she tried any of her manipulative tactics, I'd have it all on video as proof. I also dug out the damning letter about controlling my assets that had first tipped me off to their schemes. When Saturday morning rolled around, I made sure to act completely normal as Eleanor breezed through the door, as if she owned the place. "Emily, darling, how lovely to see you," she trilled in that sickly sweet voice, enveloping me in a surprisingly strong embrace. "You're looking well." I tensed at the backhanded compliment, knowing an insult was coming. "Thank you, Eleanor. What a nice surprise." She pulled back, her cold eyes sweeping over me dismissively. "Yes, well, I wanted to check in on my son's home, make sure everything is satisfactory." The emphasis on that last word made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course. Can I get you anything?" "Jack should be home from work soon." "Oh, I'm sure he's putting in those long hours as usual," Eleanor said with a little sniff. "Honestly, Emily, you simply must get a handle on his schedule. Letting a man put in those kinds of hours is no way to maintain a proper family." There it was, the dig about me being an inadequate wife and homemaker, just as her emails had outlined. I struggled to keep my anger in check. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. I'll be sure to discuss that with Jack." I forced a tight smile, hoping she'd drop the subject. But of course, she couldn't help herself from piling on. "Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to having children? Your window is closing, you know." My cheeks flushed hot with humiliation. How dare she bring up my biological clock and childless state yet again? As if I wasn't already agonizing over it enough with our marriage falling apart. "We'll have children when the time is right," I replied tersely. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to catch up on." I started to turn away, but Eleanor's clawed grip closed around my wrist, stopping me. "Emily, wait. We need to talk." The sudden seriousness in her tone made me pause, my heart pounding. Could she sense that I was onto her schemes? That I'd uncovered their emails and plans? "What is it, Eleanor?" I asked carefully, keeping my expression neutral. She released my wrist and leveled me with an intense stare. "This situation with Jack, it's become untenable. You know that, don't you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. She was really going to try this right here, right now, convince me to just hand over control to them. The arrogance was staggering. "His late nights, his indiscretions," Eleanor continued, her voice low and measured. "It's all because you failed to keep him satisfied, Emily, to give him the family he deserves." White-hot rage flooded my veins, but I kept still, letting her dig her own grave. "Maybe it's time we rethink this situation," she said, an oily smile spreading across her thin lips. "The life you thought you'd have with my son, our family's legacy and finances would be better off in other hands." That was it. The blatant confirmation that she wanted me gone so he and Jack could take everything I'd worked for. The hidden camera was capturing every vile word. "You're right, Eleanor," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "This situation is untenable, which is why I can't stay married to a man like your son any longer." Her eyes widened in surprise, but I pressed on, unable to contain my fury any longer. "I know all about your plans, the emails, the letter about controlling my assets, every despicable tactic you've outlined to turn Jack against me. You're both going to regret the day you decided to underestimate me." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled letter, shoving it into her hands. "This is just the beginning," I hissed, taking a step closer so she'd have no doubt about my deadly seriousness. "You wanted to take me for a fool and steal my life out from under me? Well, you're the fool, Eleanor, and you're going to pay for this, both of you." With that, I spun on my heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Eleanor gaping behind me in shock. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, but she didn't dare call out or try to stop me. She knew I finally had the upper hand. And she was right to be afraid of the reckoning that was coming her way. After my explosive confrontation with Eleanor, I knew there was no going back. Jack came home that evening to find me throwing clothes and essentials into an overnight bag. "Emily, what's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed with confusion. "Where are you going?" I zipped up the bag and turned to face him, my jaw set with determination. "I'm leaving, Jack. This marriage is over." His eyes went wide with shock. "What? No, you can't be serious. Whatever my mother said or did, I'm sure we can work through this." Pulling out my phone, I hit play on the recording of Eleanor's vile speech, her voice filling the room with venomous intent. Jack's expression shifted from disbelief to horror as he listened to his own mother's twisted plot to take control of my life. "You see now?" I said quietly when the recording ended. This was all a game to Eleanor. Isolate me, undermine me, until I was so beaten down that I'd just hand over everything to you two. Jack opened and closed his mouth, looking ill. "Emily, I never knew. I never would have let it go that far. You have to believe me." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't know, because you didn't want to know, Jack. You were too happy going along with her manipulation, letting her turn you against your own wife." Tears sprang into his eyes, but I had no sympathy left. Not after the months of emotional torture he'd put me through. "I can't be your wife anymore, Jack," I stated, pulling the strap of my bag over my shoulder. "I deserve better than this deceit and cruelty. From both of you." "No, please," he moved toward me imploringly. "We can fix this, start over. I'll cut my mother off completely, I swear. Just don't leave me." His arrogance was finally shattered, desperation taking over. Part of me felt a sick sense of satisfaction seeing him brought so low, begging me to stay. This was the first time I'd seen a glimpse of the man I fell in love with, but it was too little, too late. I was done being trapped in this toxic cycle of abuse. "I'm sorry, Jack," I said, pushing past him toward the door, "but we're too broken to repair. I have to value and protect myself now." His anguished sobs followed me out to my car. I didn't look back. I drove straight to my sister Judith's place in a fog, my heart pounding and hands shaking. When she opened the door and saw the state I was in, she ushered me inside and wrapped me in a fierce hug. "It's done," I said hoarsely. "I told Jack I'm leaving him, that I know everything." Judith held me at arm's length, her eyes blazing. "Good. That bastard and his mother have had this coming for a long time. You're safe now, Em. We'll get through this together." Over the next few days, I stayed with Judith and worked on getting my affairs in order. I filed for divorce, separating all our finances and assets. I contacted a fantastic lawyer my friend Martha recommended, who would fight for me tooth and nail. And most importantly, I started lining up new job opportunities, knowing I might have to walk away from my design career and company ties to Jack. It was time to regain full control of my life and identity. With each step, I felt stronger, more empowered. The shackles of Jack and Eleanor's toxic grip were falling away, however painfully. I was a woman reborn, rising from the ashes of betrayal. Jack, of course, tried every trick in the book to make me reconsider. Desperate phone calls and texts showing up unannounced at Judith's, even pleading letters filled with hollow promises to change. Each time I stood firm, refusing to be manipulated any longer. "You had your chance to come clean and stand by me," I told him during one heated exchange. "Instead, you let your mother warp your mind against your own wife. That's unforgivable." His arrogant mask finally shattered, replaced by a pathetic, sniveling mess of a man. "Emily, please. You have to understand, she's my mother. She controlled every aspect of my life. I couldn't see clearly." I almost felt pity for how weak and codependent he'd become, twisted by Eleanor's toxic narcissism. Almost. "Well, now you've lost the one person who could have given you the strength to break free," I said coldly. "I hope you two are happy, isolated together with the family legacy you destroyed our marriage for." His anguished sobs followed me back inside, where Judith stood waiting, her expression hardened. "You're doing the right thing, sis," she said, pulling me into a hug. "It's time to start putting yourself first, finally." I nodded, fresh resolve stealing me. There would be no more sacrificing my sense of self-worth, no more wilting under the harsh glare of judgmental in-laws. I was taking back the power they'd tried to steal, and making them pay for their betrayal, bit by bit. The gloves were finally off, and I wouldn't stop until I'd regained every last piece of the life they'd almost destroyed. With my newfound determination, I decided it was time to put Jack and Eleanor on full blast for their betrayal. I arranged a family meeting of sorts, inviting Judith, Jack, Eleanor, and a few of our closest friends over to Judith's house. "Are you sure you want to do this, Em?" Judith asked as we prepped her living room. "Having them all here together could get messy." I nodded firmly. "They need to be held accountable, in front of everyone. I'm done letting them manipulate the situation." When the first guests began arriving, I plastered on a calm smile, not giving any hint of what was to come. Eleanor swept in looking her usual imperious self, Jack trailing behind her like a scolded puppy. "Emily, dear, how lovely to see you," Eleanor simpered, embracing me stiffly. Over her bony shoulder, Jack gave me a pleading look, his eyes rimmed red. I pulled back from Eleanor's embrace, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you all for coming. Please, make yourselves comfortable." As our friends Martha and her husband Greg filtered in, I could sense the tension radiating from Jack and Eleanor. They knew this gathering was more than just a social call. Once we were all settled with drinks and appetizers, I cleared my throat and stood, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "I know you're all wondering why I asked you here today," I began, keeping my voice steady. "The truth is, Jack and I are getting divorced, and there are some matters that need to be addressed first." A chorus of gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Greg shook his head slowly, his expression one of disappointment aimed squarely at his wife and son. "You see, I recently uncovered a plot," I continued, pulling out the printed emails and recording from my purse. "A scheme masterminded by Eleanor to turn Jack against me, bleed me of my assets and independence, all to serve this twisted idea of protecting their family legacy." Eleanor's face drained of color as I hit play on the recording, her own damning words filling the room. Jack dropped his head in humiliated silence as our friends' expressions morphed into ones of shock and horror. When the recording finally clicked off, a heavy silence hung in the air. Eleanor opened her mouth, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't bother lying or making excuses," I stated firmly. "Those are your own words, plotting to alienate me from my husband and take everything I've worked so hard to build for myself." Martha reached across to grip my hand tightly, her eyes shining with compassion. Greg, meanwhile, turned an accusing glare on his wife. "Is this true, Eleanor? Were you really scheming against Emily this whole time?" His tone was laced with disbelief and disappointment. Eleanor's mouth worked silently, struggling to find an excuse. Jack kept his head down, unable to meet anyone's eye. "Well," Greg pressed, his voice rising impatiently, "I think we all deserve an explanation here." Finally, Eleanor seemed to find her voice, her expression twisting into an ugly sneer. "Oh, like you're one to talk about protecting family, Greg. If you had been doing your job, we wouldn't have had to take matters into our own hands." My heart dropped at her vicious outburst. Even now, faced with irrefutable proof of her cruelty, she still couldn't take responsibility. My own job? Greg sputtered, flabbergasted. You mean letting you run roughshod over everyone with your deranged sense of entitlement? I'm absolutely sickened. Judith shot me a concerned look, but I simply shook my head, letting the drama play out. It was time for their toxic family dynamics to be exposed for all to see. Emily has been nothing but a loving, supportive wife to your son, Greg continued, turning to Jack with a look of disgust. And this is how you repay her loyalty? Letting your mother poison your mind with lies and deceit? Jack remained slumped in his chair, his face ashen. He seemed to have shrunk in on himself, a pathetic shadow of the arrogant man he'd become. Eleanor, meanwhile, rallied herself, jutting out her chin defiantly. We did what was necessary to protect our family's interests. If Emily can't see that, then she had no place. That's enough. I cut her off, my voice ringing with finality. There's no more explaining away your cruelty, Eleanor. No more gaslighting or manipulation. It's over. I turned to address Jack, who still couldn't bring himself to look at me. I wanted to give you a chance to come clean, to make things right, I said, my voice catching despite my efforts to remain steely. But you were too weak, too far under your mother's control. You've lost the right to my respect, or my assets. Jack flinched at the last word, his shoulders slumping even further. In that moment, I knew I'd finally broken through his delusional sense of privilege, the entitlement that made him think he could treat me so abhorrently. I'll be taking everything that's rightfully mine and leaving, I declared, turning back to our friends. If Jack or Eleanor tries to contest it, I'll have no choice but to take legal action and bring forth all the evidence of their intentions. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. This is your one chance to walk away, Eleanor. Take it and pray I never have to see your face again after this. Eleanor opened her mouth, but Greg cut her off with a curt shake of his head. For once, the miserable woman seemed to realize she was beaten, her lips pressing into a thin, furious line. Well then, I said, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin, I believe we're done here. As I turned and strode from the room, I could feel the weight of Jack and Eleanor's hatred burning into my back. But I refused to look over my shoulder, to give them one more ounce of power over me. That part of my life was finally, blessedly over. All that was left to do was embrace the freedom ahead and leave their toxicity behind for good. After the explosive confrontation with Jack, Eleanor, and our friends, the divorce proceedings mercifully moved quickly. With the damning evidence I'd gathered, Jack's lawyers advised him not to contest claim to the assets, everything I'd built before and during our marriage. It was a hollow victory, to be sure. Winning my financial independence came at the cost of having my heart shattered into a million pieces. But I took solace knowing I'd regained control over my life and identity. Jack and Eleanor's twisted schemes had been exposed, and they no longer had power over me. With the legal proceedings wrapped up, I decided to make a fresh start by moving into a new apartment in a different part of the city, a place with no lingering memories of the betrayal and anguish I'd endured. You know, you should redecorate this place completely, my sister Judith remarked as we unpacked boxes. Make it a total reset, new energy for your new life. I smiled wistfully, surveying the empty living room. You're right. Out with the old, in with the new. That's my mantra now. Judith squeezed my shoulder supportively. I'm proud of you for having the strength to walk away from that toxic situation, Em. You're finally free. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into crafting a space that was truly my own sanctuary. I picked out new furniture, artwork, decor, all embodying the fresh, empowered outlook I was embracing. Gone were the stuffy, traditional trappings of my life with Jack and his mother's overbearing presence. With my living situation settled, I also made the decision to leave my graphic design career behind, knowing I'd always be tied to Jack's family legacy in that field. Instead, I landed an incredible opportunity as an art director at a major ad agency, allowing me to take my creativity in an entirely new direction. To Emily, a brave woman who knows her worth, Martha toasted at a celebratory dinner with friends. May this new chapter bring you the happiness and respect you deserve. As our glasses clinked together, I felt a surge of gratitude for my amazing support system. My sister, my friends, my chosen family, who had rallied around me during my darkest days. Their love and encouragement gave me the strength to persevere and fight for myself. In the weeks that followed, I thrived in my new role and environment, quickly earning praise for my innovative artistic vision. With each success, I felt more and more distance from the beaten-down woman who had allowed herself to be manipulated and mistreated for far too long. "Keep shining, sis," Judith said proudly. "You've got your groove back." A few months after my new beginning, Judith and I decided to take a rejuvenating girls' trip to the beach to celebrate my personal rebirth. As we strolled along the sand one evening, I felt an incredible lightness, like shackles had finally been removed. "Can you believe we made it through all that darkness?" I asked, looping my arm through Judith's. There were so many times I didn't think I'd ever escape Jack and Eleanor's toxic grip. Judith nodded solemnly. "I know, but you persevered, Emily. You fought for the life you deserved, no matter how brutal the struggle." We paused, gazing out at the shimmering waves as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In that moment, I felt an incredible sense of clarity and inner peace. "I'm just so glad I could see the truth before it was too late," I murmured. "That I could find the strength to walk away from the people who were supposed to love me most, when all they wanted was to control and diminish me." Judith gave my arm an affectionate squeeze. "The important thing is, you rediscovered your self-worth, Em. You get to define your own life now on your terms." I smiled, blinking back grateful tears. She was right. This new chapter was a fresh start, an opportunity to live authentically without anyone else's limits or manipulation. Just me, owning my power and potential. "You know, I used to be so afraid of being alone," I admitted, "of not having a partner, not living up to society's expectations of marriage and family." Judith watched me with a knowing smile as I continued. "But now?" I lifted my chin, reveling in the warm ocean breeze. "Now I realize that fear was just a cage, one I allowed myself to be trapped in. I'm not alone at all. I have you, our friends, my sense of self-worth that no one can take away." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Who needs a husband or in-laws when you have chosen family, right? This independence, this freedom to just live, it's the most wonderful revenge. Judith threw back her head with a joyful laugh. "Damn right, sis. Here's to kicking toxic relationships to the curb and prioritizing ourselves from now on." As we linked arms and strolled back along the beach, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the resilience that had carried me through one of the darkest periods of my life. Though the betrayal and heartache still stung, I knew I'd emerged from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more in control of my own destiny than ever before. My life was finally, blessedly, my own. And I had no intention of ever letting anyone try to take that power away from me again.